Hey guys, it's Julian from Beneath the Bunk Studios. I hope you're doing wonderfully. I am once again away at school, meaning that I am not beneath the bunk. Very sad times. The show must go on as per usual. One day, I promise, I will be able to be consistently on brand. However, until that day comes, we are talking about programming drums and what I do to make them sound less robotic and more realistic. So just a few things I want to touch on really quick before getting started. I am in Cubase. However, you can replicate anything that I'm about to show you in any DAW that is out there. Also, we're going to be working with a song that is definitely on the heavier side. However, I would apply all of these techniques the same way, regardless of genre. Drum MIDI that I'm going to be using here is from a Pennsylvania band that I just finished producing. They're called Ape Brutality. They're wonderful, wonderful people, wonderful songs. This song is called You're Alive. Go check it out. It's new. It's out now. Lastly, the drum MIDI in this video is from the final song. However, the drum sounds are not from the final song. In this video, I'm going to be using Get Good Drums, Modern and Massive, with the in-your-face preset and the turbo on 100%. So let's finally get started here. We're in Cubase. This is the drum MIDI that I have for this song. This is what I programmed, and where we're going to be focusing a lot of our attention throughout the course of this video is this bottom part of the screen right here. So what exactly is that? What exactly are all of these little bars? Why are they all different lengths? Blah, 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 blah. So every single bar that you see here represents an individual drum hit, and the length of the bar corresponds to how hard the drum is supposed to sound like it's being hit. So for example, this drum hit right here is a little bit on the higher side. That means it's going to sound like it's getting hit harder or at a higher velocity. And on the lower hits here, it's lower because the velocity is lower. In other words, it's going to sound like the drum is being hit softer. The reason we're going to be paying so much attention to these velocity bars is because they play the biggest role in making sure our drum parts sound as realistic as possible. So why is that? Why is it so important that we change these velocities? We make sure all these bars are different lengths. Well, let's dive into one of the most common beginner level mistakes that you can make when you're programming drums. When I was a beginner, I did this myself. I'm definitely guilty. That mistake is that they take all the MIDI and they max out all of the velocities, especially people in rock and metal will do this. They'll max out all the velocities, turn them up to 127, and then hit play, and then they get drums that sound like this. So the main thing you're going to notice is that that didn't sound remotely realistic. It sounded like every single drum was getting hit as hard as possible because all the velocities are maxed out. And why exactly does this sound realistic? Well, that's because no drummer in the history of ever could possibly play every single hit like that at the same exact velocity, hit every single drum the same exact way, and make it sound as robotic as that just sounded. So if we hit Control-C and go back to the way that the velocities were before I jacked everything up, now you'll understand why I change things around as much as I do. But how do I do this? So the first thing I'm doing when I'm programming drums is making sure that all the parts are correct. However, after that is when I start to focus on velocities. And at that point, I'm reaching for this wonderful thing called the logical editor that Cubase has. The logical editor is a feature of Cubase which essentially allows you to take a bunch of MIDI and apply a certain set of parameters to all the MIDI that was selected. In this case, we're going to be using a preset from the logical editor, which is random velocity, 60 to 10. 60 to 10 is a little bit too broad for this case, and I also want some velocities higher than 100, so that's not going to work for us. So we're just going to jump right in here, and we're going to do 120 to 125. That's just the numbers that I've been using for a while. That's what I like to do. It's what sounds best for me. And after making sure that all of our MIDI is selected, we're going to click apply. I'm not going to do it because I already did, but that's essentially what I do. Keep in mind that if you're in Cubase and you're thinking of trying out this technique, I definitely recommend really listening closely to your samples before doing these exact numbers, because every sample library is different. Every sample library layers their different velocities different. 125 might not sound like 125 in one library compared to another. They could be different. So definitely experiment, see what sounds good for you. So although the logical editor is a fantastic tool, it does not pick up when faster hits are happening. For example, even though I just randomized the velocities a little bit, when you're having hits that are happening this quickly and that kind of stuff, you're still going to end up in a place that sounds pretty robotic. So what do I do to combat that? I pretty much comb through the entire song looking for anywhere that there are fills or anywhere that there are hits that are fast, one after the other. So for example, this would definitely be something that I'd zoom in on and change further. These little snare hits I would change further. You get the idea. So if you're like me and you're not a drummer, you might be a little bit confused. How do I know where to set my velocities? How do I know what to change? How do I know what to leave alone? Etc., etc. At this point, I've done it so much that I see a fill and I'm like, okay, I kind of know the general way that the velocities should look at this part. So for example, we have this 16th note snare roll right here, like that, dugga dugga. So you could either drum that out on your desk, or you could just say it like I just did, like dugga dugga. So if you really listen to the way that I just said dugga dugga as foolish as it sounds, you can actually hear where I'm placing the emphasis just by saying the fill with that stupid syllable. So dugga dugga, I would emphasize these two notes, which is what I'm doing here, and then I would not emphasize this and this, so that it sounds like the way a real drummer would play it. And at the end, once you're dealing with anything that's incredibly tedious, you move away from having drums that sound like this, and you move closer to having drums that sound like this, much more realistic and less robotic. Before we finish up talking about velocities, another thing I will do sometimes is emphasize things by putting them at 127. So for example, say I really want this kick drum right here to be played at max velocity to really emphasize that next part of the song. I would just take it and I would drag it up to 127. I would maybe even do the same thing with the crashes. Moving on from talking about velocities, this is pretty sampler specific, so it depends on what kind of sampler you're using because not every sampler has this. However, luckily with Get Good Drums, they have multiple articulations for different hits. So for example, as you can see here, I have 4 different hi-hat open articulations. The way I take advantage of this is whenever the drummer is playing open hi-hat hits in succession with one another, I will randomly drag some onto different articulations. So as you could see, I'm going between hi-hat open 1, hi-hat open 2, and hi-hat open 3 here. And I do it really sporadically. I'll literally go through like this. So say we have everything set here. I'll go through like this. I'll go through like that. I'll go through like that. And just randomly drag things into different places. I do something similar with the ride cymbal. I like to alternate between the ride bell and the edge of the ride. I would do something similar with the snare if there were separate articulations for rim shots and regular snare hits, but GGD does not have that. The final thing that I like to do in order to make my program drums sound a little bit less robotic and more realistic is I like to drag some of my hits a little bit at a time, just so that you can account for the way that a drummer is not going to play perfectly in time if he were really playing these parts. So as you can see here, this is an example of a time I did that. It's really easy to get away with cymbals being played at a time, a little bit harder to get away with kick and snare. You have a little bit less wiggle room. As you can see here, this is an instance where I did that. I took this cymbal and dragged it a little bit late, so it would be a little bit behind the beat. I also did that here, and here I made it ahead. And once all that's put together, I end up running away from drums that sound like this. And I end up with drums that sound much more realistic and less robotic. That's about all I got for today, guys. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you got something out of it, let me know. If you didn't, let me know. If you have any questions, let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. My name is Julian from Beneath the Bunk Studios, and I will see you next time.